Well, Greg, welcome back.
Thanks, Keith. It's great to be here.
Yeah, so you were on vacation last week.
I was. Yes, we missed Biz Talk Weekly last week because I was unavailable. I was having a little vacation time, so that felt really good.
Well, I'm happy for you. I'm glad you're back. I kind of missed you. But we are back.
Believe it or not,
Now,
I missed you too. Vacation's
well,
nice, but it's also nice to get back in the saddle as well.
yeah, I'm kind of missable. I understand that.
Yeah.
Anyway, one of the things that I thought about, and you and I discussed a little bit before we came on, was what do you do when you start a business and you had all these elaborate plans and things just don't seem to be happening the way you thought they would? I personally have plenty of those experiences, and I know that you've had that even with your most recent, purchase of a franchise.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
it never happens the way you think it's going to happen. It's which is kind of funny because it goes towards how we think as humans. We have a vision,
Well, you
and
get a picture in your head,
and then
right, of how things are gonna unveil, and it doesn't happen that way, or very rarely does it happen that way.
so on that note, tell me what your thoughts were. You investigated franchises. You took good amount of time to determine what you wanted to do and what franchise you were going to purchase. And then you went through training, went through the whole process,
Yeah.
and then it was time to kick it off.
Right.
So, what were your expectations pre kickoff compared to what started to transpire as you were finally in business?
Yeah. Yeah. I think, I knew there would be a ramp up period, right? And I planned for that. Um, what's interesting is I thought, because one of the things we did as part of our training was we put our annual plan together. And my plan was, I was going to get so many clients by the end of the first year, but I didn't expect to get any clients the first 3 months. I mean, I knew that I had to, uh, start the process of lead generation. And as you and I have talked before, this type of business doesn't lend itself to somebody immediately buying coaching services, right? It
Right.
takes several conversations. It takes them getting to know you, you getting to know them, to know that you're a good fit. But I thought, okay, I'll get my first client after 90 days. And then after that, I thought, okay, now it's just going to start rolling. I'll add one every month or so. Um, but it doesn't go that way. it, Even though I would say I kind of had an early success with getting a client that, in some ways, maybe that was even too soon, because I think it led me to think, oh, this isn't going to be so difficult to get new clients. I can even remember in January, so I had just started, and I ran into a guy who I didn't know, and we got to talking. He asked what I did, and I said I'm a business coach for a company called Focal Point, and he said, I've been looking for a business coach. So I'm 2 weeks into things. I don't even think my website was set up yet, and I'm meeting this guy for coffee, and we're talking about potentially being a client of mine. Now it hasn't happened yet, and I think that's the one thing that I really learned about this, is that sometimes timing just isn't right for folks. Right? And that doesn't mean they're not going to ever be a client. It just means they're not going to be a client right now. Right. So I think my big takeaway in the 6, 8 months now that I've been doing this is to just really be persistent. really be really be take a proactive approach. Don't let setbacks or quiet times be a negative. Use those as a positive, right? So there's times in business, like, in the summer in Minnesota, it's hard to get to people. People are at their cabins, they're on vacations, it's just a more challenging time to connect with people. So I've been trying to use that time to really get myself well prepared so that when the kids go back to school and there's, I would say, more focus on folks looking at their business as opposed to having some downtime during the summer, right? So I think the big takeaway from my standpoint, Keith, is not to get discouraged by the lack of by that roller coaster of activity, right? When you're in sort of that valley, there's a peak coming. That's just the way business works. And the idea is to be prepared for when that takeoff happens.
Yeah. So what's interesting is that, there are a lot of different businesses that you could have gone into that would have had fewer peaks and valleys, because, like, in my world, when I started in retail happens every day.
Yeah.
Doors open, and you may have a slow day, may have a busy day, but it's rarely ever a no day, where it's like, okay, unless it's like a winter storm, and
Yeah.
nobody can get out. So, those were the days that we wouldn't even open. It's like, oh my God, a lost day of business. So you need to have a certain mindset for a business that has a longer sales cycle, because it's like you said, you were lucky to get somebody so quickly, but maybe it gives you a false sense of like you said, oh, this is easy.
Yeah.
Yeah. And when you plan a business, you usually go with, and you're a finance guy, so you put your spreadsheets together. I call it spreadsheet main. And well, if I do this many in month one, and then I do this many in month two, and blah, and you start to extrapolate. Before you know it, I have a business, and I did X amount of dollars, and I made the. So none of that, or I should say, it's all good to do that as part of your planning, but you almost have to throw it away and ignore it, for the simple fact that until reality sets in and the real world, nobody knows. Nobody knows. You just know that, it's like, I'm not a chef, okay, but if I wanted to make something, okay, and I looked at a recipe and I have all the ingredients, everything, and how much to put in, and I go and I cook, it may not come out that good. Did I put in too much? Did I put in too little? Okay, did I cook it too much? Did I not cook it enough? Now, I use that as an analogy because really there is a formula in business in terms of what it takes to open a business in a particular industry. What things do you have to do? How much money do I need to start this business? How much marketing do I need to do? How many employees do I need to hire? All of that is like, really, you're almost like a mad scientist, like a little bit of this, a little bit of that, until you finally get the formula right. And a lot of it is trial and error. And it's hard to explain that to somebody who's never been in business, because there are people that'll say, oh, it's really not that difficult, but they don't tell you about all the times that they failed.
Right.
I think we talked on one of our episodes about, was it the Einstein quote, or was it, who was the other guy that said,
the light bulb?
I didn't fail 10,000. Yeah, I
Yeah.
failed 10,000 times. I found 1,000 ways it didn't work, you know, so
Right.
also Einstein, it was,
Until he
I always,
found how it worked.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
I,
So I,
I think
I
Keith,
find,
go ahead.
no, I find that in every business that somebody starts, there are starts and stops. There are adjustments. There are things that, wow, that's not working. You hire somebody. I remember my first store that I opened that eventually became my franchise company. I was still running my business in Brooklyn and going back and forth. I hired a guy. I don't know if I was desperate to hire somebody. I wanted to have a manager for when I wasn't there. The guy was so bad. Not only was he bad, he was annoying. Okay. And he used to have change in his pocket and he'd be jingling it all the time. Drove me
Oh boy.
crazy.
Yeah.
Of course, I fire him, but, I don't remember how long he lasted, but it wasn't too long. But, it's just, so that was a mistake. Okay. I should have taken more time to interview more people. But again,
Mhm.
these are adjustments. Okay. And
Right.
eventually I closed my business in Brooklyn and I was able to be full time in my Long Island business. And so I was, the face of the company.
I think, I suspect you and I would have, or do have, different approaches when it comes to kind of that business startup, because I'm more of a planner and you're probably more of a, I'm going to just jump in and do this. And you said a few minutes ago, you know, I might have this plan, but I don't know that I'm going to follow it. I might throw it out. And I think there are business owners who just instinctively kind of know what to do. And so they don't need a real detailed plan. But I think there's others who, like myself, want to have a plan to follow. But I think it's really critical to know that there are times when you need to, as you said, you need to adjust. You need to step back and say, hey, this was part of my plan, but it's not working. So what do I do? Do I keep following a plan that's not working, or do I make an adjustment? And I think
Yeah.
that's just something you learn over time, right? There's an analogy about a prospector back in the old west. He was prospecting for gold, right? And he bought a piece of land and he was prospecting and he prospecting, nothing, can't find any gold, sells the property, at a loss, never recognized his dream. And the new buyer goes out the first day and starts digging 3 feet from where this guy was digging, and he strikes gold. Right. So sometimes you're right at the cusp of success, but you don't know it because this is all new, right? You don't recognize where you're at in the process. And that's why I think stepping back and taking a look at and making adjustments is valuable. But even so, it can be challenging to know where you're really at in your business. We talked about peaks and valleys, and sometimes it's hard to recognize how deep the valley is and how steep the peak is going to be.
Yeah. So just to go back to the whole idea of a plan, I think there's value in putting a plan together. I always did. Where I think the problem lies is that if you are so head set on, well, I have a plan, okay, and I'm going to follow this plan to the T, and at the end of the day, I'm going to have a chocolate cake. No, I think the point I was trying to make, and probably I did not articulate it well, was that once you're in the real world, all the planning you do pretty much goes out the window. It's just like having a guide. Okay, it's like, you have a blueprint to build a house and you thought you were going to put the bathroom on the left side, and then all of a sudden you built the foundation, you built some walls. Something, I really don't like the bathroom being on the left side. I really want it to be closer to the kitchen. So
Yeah.
these are the things that, again, I'm using different things as analogies, but at the end of the day, you need to be flexible, okay, and not be rigid in your thought process that I got to stick to this come hell or high water. One, you do have to give it enough time. So, I tend to be, impatient. So sometimes I've gone in both directions. I waited too long to make a move, and other times I should have waited longer. Okay, that's the example you just gave with the gold. Okay, if you would have waited or just taken three steps to the left and said,
Right.
maybe I should be digging here. But that's what makes business so exciting and entrepreneurship so much fun, is because you really don't know. I mean, it really is a journey of trials and errors to get to a point where things are really humming. It's like everything that you had hoped for, it may not have happened in that first year. Okay. It may not happen until this third year. So
Right.
I think that's real important that people know that the planning is important because it gives you direction, but you have to really be willing to look and see, is this working or not working?
The other thing, Keith, is we run our business in an environment that we're in, right? And sometimes the environment we're in changes. And
Yeah.
if that's the case, especially if it's a significant change, the plan we put together might have had some assumptions in it. And now those assumptions have really been turned on their head. So now that plan isn't really valid anymore. Like you said before, only now it's being caused by external forces. And I'll give you an example. I went to many years ago. I was in a a planning conference, right? And the guy starts off saying, so this was in the 80s, and he says, okay, how many of you planned in your plan for this year, planned for the market to drop 500 points on one day? No one raises their hand. How many of you planned on, there being unrest in a part of the country, in a part of the world that was, peaceful up until a few months ago? Nobody raises their hand. And he says, so why are you still following the plan that you put together that had those assumptions in it? And his point really was, you need to make adjustments to your plan. You can't just do this plan once and then lock it down and say, okay, I'm going to follow this come hell or high water. That plan needs to be an active document that is going to have changes made to it. And I think that's okay. In fact,
Yeah,
I would encourage that. I think too many companies, especially public companies, right? Because they put a plan out there, they put guidance out there to their shareholders. Hey, we're going to make X amount of money this year. We're going to make X earnings per share. And they really feel like they have to achieve that. For us in small business, it's our own goals. We don't have shareholders to answer to. We have ourselves. And I think being flexible and adjustable on your plan makes total sense.
Look, it's all a plan is a roadmap. And just like if you were, on the highway going somewhere and you had your GPS and it tells you to go one way, and all of a sudden you get to this exit, it goes traffic ahead, okay, delays of at least 20 minutes, and they say take exit so and so to go this. I mean, that's truly how business is.
Yeah.
You have this roadmap, you're driving along, okay, and something happens.
Yeah.
Okay.
Great
and
analogy. Yeah.
We have a
Because
down
maybe,
economy, right?
and maybe you still get to the place where you were planning on going, but you didn't go in the route that you expected to go. There were all sorts
And it
of
took longer.
changes along the way. Yeah.
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 And it took longer, which is really what happens in business. All of this is important for someone contemplating going into business to understand that you still go through the whole process. You still plan because you have a direction. You know what you're going to do. When I built my franchise company, we put together, hired a company, a consulting company that actually helped me put together policies and procedures, which went through every step of what a franchisee would have to do from the moment they got to the business. Back then, there was no online. You get to the business, you open the door, you turn the lights on, you clean the store, make sure the garbage, you're preparing for your day. Okay. And here's what you do. And, most people become creatures of habit, and, I'm not rigid and I'm not what you call overly organized in certain areas, but I do like a repetitive process where I know every day this is what I do. I don't have to sway for, today I'm doing this, I'm doing that. And everybody's different. So let's acknowledge that,
Yeah.
when you
Well, and
first go into business, you don't know what you don't.
Right. And I think I've gone through enough sales training with you, Keith, to know that, you may be more of, you may be less of a planner, but you're not less of a salesperson because of that. Because you're very regimented in terms of the things you need to do to be successful in sales. Right? And it's not, you don't take an approach that says, well, you can do it this way one day and you can do it this way another. And yes, you have to adjust depending on who your client is and the circumstances, but you still have a process that you go through and that you coach to get to a positive outcome.
Yeah, it's process oriented with adjustments as you go along, because I think it was Mike Tyson who said, until you get punched in the face, you really don't know. And business is like that. You're gonna get gut punches along the way. And sometimes it's things are going well, but the bank account is getting lower and lower because you have a negative cash flow, and quite often in an early stage business, and you start getting nervous. I can remember the early stages of my first store. My wife and I started it together, and we couldn't buy groceries that week. That's how bad it got.
Yeah.
And of course we got through it, and we got stronger, and we started, by year 2 we started to become profitable. But it was tough in the beginning. It was very, very hard. You don't know.
You're building a brand.
Perfect example. Building a brand.
I think what's interesting.
The day.
I think what's interesting about what you said there, Keith, is that a lot of times what causes a business to go out of business is the fact that they haven't planned for how long it was going to take for the business to ramp up. Right. So if you plan for a short ramp up period and you think, oh, in 3 months I'm going to be, this business is going to be generating positive income, but it really takes 3 years, that's probably going to be a problem. Because if you haven't planned for a longer ramp up, if it ramps up sooner, great. But if you're assuming it's going to be a quick ramp up and it isn't, a lot of times individuals, companies, they run out of money. Like you just said, the bank account gets down to nothing. And now it's like, okay, now what do I do? Right. And that's where you start really facing some very difficult questions about what to do next.
I could remember, on paper, having every expense listed, which was, I had to pay for a doctor, I had to pay for an employee, I had to pay the rent. I had borrowed money for leasing equipment, I had my lease payments, and I knew I had to take a certain amount of money out of the business to just live. And, and you sit there, okay, so we have X amount in the bank this month. If we don't do this amount, I'm going to reduce my working capital by X. Okay, then you start extrapolating. This is where the mental nothingness comes in. You go, wow, if I have 4 more months like this, I'm out of cash. It's like, then what do I do? And then it becomes how do you manage negative cash flow? I mean, there's so much that goes into surviving. I mean, it's truly survival of the fittest, because you have to have a strong stomach for business, unless you were born into a lot of money and you have an endless amount of working capital because dad
Right.
or mom is foot bill. But it's rarely like it's
Yeah.
rarely like that. So it's
Yeah.
I was going to make a point before you go on. You talk about, you have certain things that drove your assumptions. So when I would lease a location for one of my stores, it was always in a shopping center. It wasn't like a standalone. And at that time, I was working with a developer who was opening a lot of new shopping centers. So my first store was in a new shopping center. It was the main attraction was CVS pharmacy. So you start to think about, wow, CVS is there. People go to CVS every day. There'll be a lot of traffic. My store was right next to CVS. Now, that was good, but the rest of the shopping center was empty. Okay, so that means that my assumptions was based on like a full shopping center. There was X amount of population within a 3-mile radius, and you start to play, the kind of mental games where you say, well, if there's a 500,000 people within 3 miles, and X amount wear glasses, and and there's 10 stores as competitors, and so I'm saying none of that. It's fine because it gives you a sense of control, because at least you're working through what could be. But when I said before, then you throw it away because it's not reality.
Right.
But it's valuable in terms of planning of what's going to be. How much time do I have before I run out of cash?
Yeah. I mean, I'm assuming you were in a better position being next to a CVS than if you had set your store up next to a manufacturing facility, right?
Yeah.
I mean, people
Yeah.
don't go through industrial parks looking for glasses. They go to retail places to look for glasses. So
No,
you did what you
that's
thought
exactly right.
set you up for the best opportunity for success.
Yeah, and it turned out to be a very, very successful store. It's what launched my franchise company.
Yeah.
I wound up selling that store as my first franchise. It wasn't the model for the rest of the franchise company. So all of these things are what makes people not want to go into business. Everything we're talking about, it's like, well, after hearing this, I'm not so sure that I want to take the plunge. So you waited a long time to go into your own business. So were these the kind of fears that you had? I mean, I think we talked about it on our last episode, like why you didn't go into business at 25.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when I was 25, I was married with a young family, and that just didn't feel right. And even at that time, I really didn't even think about, oh, I'd like to go into business for myself. I think as I progressed in my career, and you start to see things and you learn things and you start to say, I could do this. I could run a business. I think it wasn't until I'd probably been working for 15 years in a regular job that it started to pique my interest. That, hey, maybe someday I'd like to, own my own business. And again, timing is everything. And it just happened that, timing for me was better later in my career than it was early in my career. I really liked one thing you said there though, was that, we're talking, we're talking about some things that may be coming across as negative to folks who are listening to this, right? Like, oh boy, I don't know if I want to do this. And I think that's exactly, if you're contemplating starting a business, that's exactly the question and questions to be asking. Because the person who should start a business is the one who can hear those things and say, I understand that, but I'm not afraid of it. Versus somebody who hears that and says, hey, that is not for me. And if it's not for you, then don't do it. Don't start a business if it doesn't feel like that's what you were meant to do, or you really felt like you wanted to do that. Because you said it a few minutes ago, Keith. There were times when you were wondering, hey, how am I going to pay the bills? Right? If I'm running my own business and I'm not working a job and the business isn't going well, how do I make ends meet? I still got expenses, personal expenses. I still got to pay the mortgage if I got a mortgage. I still got to pay the car payment. I still got to buy groceries. So I think it's really smart to be asking those kind of questions and to set the bar really high to say, yeah, it is going to be challenging, but I'm up for the challenge. And if you're not, you shouldn't feel bad about that. You shouldn't feel like you're a failure for not starting your own business. You should just say that's not for me, and move on. Because as we've talked before, business ownership isn't for everybody.
No, it's not. But there are other options, to work through the fear. It's like, for me, it just so happened that I went into business with people I was working for first. I had a smaller percentage. Okay. I didn't own the whole thing, but it was a valuable lesson. I didn't have the financial pressure that I would have had, that I did have when I opened up my first it wasn't a franchise store yet, my first store myself, my first true retail. That was in a medical building. Okay. Again, it would be like going next to a manufacturer. Although there was retail around there, it wasn't truly a retail corner. No one's going to find you in a medical building. Just so happens we were in that business because the ophthalmologist who my partners did business with said, hey, why don't you open up, a satellite office in our building that we bought. Okay. But using that as the basis for what else you can do, you could try to get into a situation where someone is older and is not ready to retire yet, but they're looking for somebody that could eventually take over the business or buy the business. So there are other options without, jumping in the water without a life preserver, which I've been known
Really
to
good point.
do.
Yeah. Yeah. There, as opposed to starting a business, there is an option to buy a business, right? And you buy an existing business and there's existing cash flow. There's, the infrastructure is kind of in place already, assuming it's a decently run business. So yeah, you're right. You can become a business owner overnight with a business that's got kind of a recurring cash flow versus starting a business from scratch.
Yeah. So there are other options, and that's interesting because we really should, in the future, we'll talk about that of how to go about buying an existing business as opposed to starting from scratch.
Yeah.
Because starting from scratch is your biggest risk. You just don't know.
Yep.
Now, the nice thing today is that you can have an online business where the financial risks are so much smaller.
Right.
You don't have, the brick and mortar expense, all the employees that you need to have. It doesn't mean that if you don't need people to work once the business starts to grow, but this is what I really enjoy about business in general, is that there's always a way if there's a will. If you want to be in business, you'll find a way to be in business. And that's how I was. I was determined to be in business. Nothing was going to stop me. I'm kind of fearless. not in general, but in business, you know,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
fearless, to be honest, was reckless at times. Okay, so there's a fine line between fearless and reckless, you know, so it's like, okay, you're taking this, why are you opening a second store? You're still not making money in the first store. Well, I think now's the right time. I'm young, I have no kids yet, you know, I'm gonna take the plunge, I'm going for it. Worked
Yeah,
out
you,
okay, but
right, right. But again, it's all about risk tolerance, right? There could have been there could have been a duplicate store right next to you, right? A different owner who was in the same circumstance and said, you know, it's not the right time to open the second store because I'm not making money in my first store yet. So risk tolerance plays a lot into, you know, our decision making process, right? So
yeah,
in understanding how much risk we can live with, it's important to know as we're getting into business, whether we're starting a business, buying a franchise, buying an existing business, whatever the case may be.
yeah, I think it comes down to is how much are you willing to leverage yourself, which is the risk part of it,
Yeah.
in order to achieve what you're trying to achieve. So that'll also be something we could talk about in the future. So as we end this week, what is your big takeaway for yourself, it being in business now and knowing that, because we've talked about this, that whatever you thought would happen is happening much slower.
Yeah. I think, you know, the big takeaway for me is I think it's really important to go in with both eyes wide open and understanding the risks, understanding that, yes, you may have a plan in place, but I think the chances that your business is going to follow your plan exactly are very, very low. So you need to be ready to adjust and make changes. And you know, and if you've really made that decision, hey, I'm going to start this business, then I think it's really important to go in, you know, all in. I mean, if you're going to do it, then jump in with both feet. Don't no, we've talked a little bit about it. Maybe there's some ways to ease into it, which we can talk about in the future. But if you really are starting your business, you know, there comes a point where it's kind of like, wow, I can't really turn around now. I'm in this thing, right? I've left my job. This is my source of income. So I better get all in and do everything I can to make my business as successful as possible.
Yes, and there's the risk reward ratio that you have to determine, you know, is it worth is the rewards worth the risk? And that's only something that each individual could decide for themselves. So
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Greg,
No one can tell you that. Yeah.
nope, this was another interesting subject that I think I'm sure we'll talk more about this in other episodes. But until next week, another one in the can.
Yeah. Good discussion. I hope folks listen to it and really take it to heart. And yeah, excellent discussion.
Until next week.
That
Thanks,
sounds
Greg.
good, Keith. I'll look forward to it.
Thanks.